Hey there, art nerds. So today I'm taking a look at the Rosa Gallery or Rosa Galleria watercolors. These are Ukrainian watercolors that have a fair amount of hype behind them if you check the Amazon reviews, but might be flying under your radar. I've heard them very favorably compared to White Nights watercolors, and they're much cheaper. So if you like White Nights, this might be the watercolor for you. Currently running a poll on both Twitter and YouTube to determine which of the student grade showdown watercolors I should review next. And while that poll is still ongoing, there was a clear leader on both platforms. Y'all really want to see the Rosa Galleria or Rosa Gallery watercolors. I've heard great things about these watercolors, but they're not as popular as you might think. So I'm really hoping these are going to be as good as the hype claims, and I can share a great, affordable, actually professional grade brand with you guys today. So I purchased this 21-piece set of Rosa Galleria watercolors off of Amazon for $36.98. And one of the things that's really important during the student grade showdown, because there are actually a couple of professional grade watercolors that found their way in here, is that I don't spend too much money on any of these sets. My goal is to find great, affordable, accessible watercolors that could be useful for younger artists, for artists on a budget, or for people who are interested in watercolor, but they don't want to spend a whole lot of money to do so. So these have kind of flown under my radar for a really long time. Amazon didn't ever recommend them to me until I started buying a bunch of student grade watercolors. And then they were like, hey, you might like these Rosa Galleria watercolors. So I'm going to link them in the description for you guys so you don't have to search too hard to find them. So Rosa offers a few other palette styles. There's actually kind of a cool clamshell style that I wish I'd seen before I ordered that, because I really would have liked to try that. I'm always on the lookout for unusual palettes. This is more of a traditional metal watercolor palette. So if that's what you're in the market for, if that's what you're looking for, that should fit the bill. And they seem to be primarily available in the US through Amazon. They are a Ukrainian brand. Some people have even compared them very favorably, I might add, to the St. Petersburg White Nights. I reviewed those a while back, but they are currently packed up because I'm still evacuated and my stuff is still mid-move. So I would love to do a head-to-head comparison at some point for you guys. So if you would like to see that, please let me know down in the description below that you're interested, and I'll make sure to do that for you guys. So Rosa has their own website. I'll link that for you guys in the description. They also have their Amazon listing web portal where they offer more things. You can buy sets. You can also buy the individual paints. Rosa watercolors come in tubes and I believe whole pans. And they also make paints, canvases, easels, and wood supplies, brushes and palette knives, art books and paper, accessories, hobby and craft supplies, and they have several sub-brands. Rosa, which is museum quality, although really I don't know what people mean by that when they say museum quality, because while museums host works of art, museum curators are often not artists themselves, so I assume they mean archival, professional grade, but frankly, I don't know. I mean, Jackson Pollock's work is in museums and he just slung latex house paint at canvases, so it could really mean a wide variety of things. Rosa Gallery, which is for professionals, and that's what we're reviewing today. Rosa Studio, which is for sketching, training, and work in the studio. Rosa Talent, which is for decorating and scrapbooking. Rosa Start, which is for beginners in art. And Rosa Kids, which is for children. But on Amazon, it primarily seems to be the Rosa Gallery line. But if you guys know where I can get the Rosa museum quality, I would really like to try those out after I finish this review. Rosa promises organic and inorganic pigments, organic gumarabic, high pigment concentration, clear and vibrant colors, and the colors and their hues in the tubes are identical to the ones in the pans. And all of that sounds really promising to me. And they also strive to collaborate with professional artists. You can find that by going to their website. So they talk to artists early on to figure out what they're looking for, what kind of color palette they want, qualities like transparency and intensity of different colors, the paint consistency, and how well or how easily they work with a brush, which I like. I think a lot of art supply companies talk to a couple artists to figure out what those artists like. I would really like to see more companies collaborate more closely with artists, but that kind of ties into a conversation we don't have to have today about how I feel often art supplies are quite divorced from their target audience, or the audience they say is their target audience. So I'm going to have show notes for all of this down in the description below, where you can find out more information as well as my thoughts written out. For those of you who just have a lot of trouble following along with like video reviews and video tutorials, I always have the show notes down in the description. And if the show notes get to be too long, I always have a Google Docs link where you can read the whole thing. So you're not going to miss anything. All right, y'all, enough preamble. Let's go ahead and unbox and swatch the Rosa Gallery or Rosa Galleria watercolors. We have a cardboard package with a cardboard belly band. On the back, I actually really like this. So we have all of our pigment information. So you guys might want to hold on to the belly band if you guys decide to go with this set. So we have the names in Ukrainian. We have the names in English. We also have the pigment information, which thank you, Rosa. We also have the lightfast information, that would be these stars, and we have the transparency information. If we were buying this in a store, it's all in a very easy to find format. You're not going to have to dig on the internet to find this. I really appreciate that. I'm going to make sure to transcribe all this for you guys down in the description below, so you have it for easy reference. The packaging includes a cardboard box with a cardboard belly band. It's bright, professional, and attractive, and not shrink wrapped. The belly band contains the paint names, pigment info, lightfast info, and transparency info. So good job, Rosa. I really appreciate that this is accessible and on the outside of your packaging. The packaging is pretty simple. There's a somewhat generic metal printed tin on the inside of the cardboard box, and inside the tin are welds for mixing and 3 rolls of half pans. Inside our cardboard box is a pretty simple, straightforward metal tin, very similar to what you can commonly find online from like Meeden. That's not a problem for me. There's a little bit of branding here, and there is also a thumb loop. I never use those things. It doesn't rock, and it closes quite nicely. Inside is just simple white enamel, a little bit more branding there, and then we get to the true goodies. So I like a lot of things about this fairly simple, straightforward palette. We have whole pans here. I like how these are wrapped. It doesn't seem like they're wrapped in foil. So each one is individually wrapped like little candies. No plastic wrap, no foil. So hopefully this will biodegrade with time. On the outside is the color number, the color name in both English and Ukrainian. There is also very, very tiny information, mostly just like their email, stuff like that. Then there's also their lightfast information, their pigment information, and their transparency information. And I really apologize if you're picking up anybody else's voice in the background. I am recording while I'm evacuated, and there's only so much you can do to sequester yourself. My friends with kids or who still live at home probably 100% know what I'm talking about. So I want to go ahead. Oh, and one more thing I like about this palette is that there is an entire row that I could fill up with half pans, whole pans, whatever. So there's actually room to grow with this palette. And since Rosa does offer open stock pans, although it mentions it on Amazon, but I could not find a live listing for it. So if you know how to do that via Amazon, let me know. They also talk about them on the Rosa website, but unfortunately, there are no US distributors. So it's not like Blick offers these or Jerry's, to my knowledge, according to the Rosa website. That could change. Things change all the time as products become popular. They do become more available. But if you want to, there is room to grow or room to customize this palette, and it would work with basically any other standard half pans or whole pans on the market. So I like that. That's good to see. I am all about compatibility, as you guys know from my super ratty Daily Driver watercolor palette. So I want to go ahead and get these unwrapped for you guys. I'm going to do that in time lapse because nobody's got time to watch that in real time. And then we can finally get around to swatching these watercolors, which is what I know you guys are all really waiting for. Our half pans are individually wrapped, and there isn't any sort of foil wrapping. It's just an adhesive sticker. The label could be cut just in the center with a good sharp X-Acto blade, but unfortunately during evacuation I have no such thing. So I'm spending a bit more time cutting the labels to reserve the color number and the pigment / lightfast info for each pan, as the pans themselves, while quite stylish and obviously custom, don't include printed color info, and I like having that handy. Not every pan has this, but you can remove a little piece of paper from the front. This protects the paint from the adhesive sticker, which is very smart, Rosa, and use that sticker on the back to fill in the rest of the info. It's a little bit more time consuming, but quicker than writing all that info out by hand, so I really appreciate the design choices here. So I'm pretty pleased to say there really wasn't that much waste from how these were wrapped, and honestly you could pretty much reuse every piece if you really wanted to as part of your organization and labeling. I only opted to keep that front graphic for the pieces that didn't have the color number and the color name printed on the side. Some of them only said Rosa Galleria. That might be an older version. I really like the version that has one side with the color name and color number and the other side with the pigment, lightfast, and opacity info. Very clever on your part, Rosa, and it shows that you're actually thinking about your artist consumers, which I really appreciate. These have the look of hand-poured watercolors. You guys can see some slight imperfections. That's actually something I really like to see, because there's a lot of watercolor brands that claim their watercolors are poured, but they're really extruded watercolors, and they just never perform as well as poured watercolors. These are a little bit sticky to the touch, which I also like. It tells me they're probably not as full of extenders, because extenders have a tendency to mattify the paints and make them less sticky, since they're often like titanium, or PW6, which is like titanium white, which is kind of like a chalky sort of white. And these really kind of remind me of the Roman Schmalz, or Schmalz, sorry, my pronunciation is terrible, Aquarius watercolors, which I reviewed for you guys, and I really like them. And I find myself grabbing them time and time again. So I feel like a combination of these two sets, because you can find the Roman Schmalz watercolors on Jackson's Art, might be a really good way to go if you like these and you want an affordable price point, which 21 watercolors for about $36, $37, especially considering they seem like they're, professional quality. That's a really good deal. But that's also something that I really like about the Roman Schmalz watercolors, is they're very affordable for the price point too. I apologize for the literal caterwauling in the background. Bowie and Dax are play fighting, so I am gonna go take care of that, and then we can get on to our swatching. All right, the part that everyone has been so patiently waiting for, and I figure some of you guys have skipped to this part, so we're about to do our swatching. We've done our unboxing, it's time for the swatching. And for today's unbox and swatch, I am using a Blick Studio Cotton Rag watercolor block. So I'm going to give these paints the best chance they have at performing well. And Cotton Rag tends to give most paints a fairer shot than cellulose will. I am also using a silver black velvet flat. These are pans, like whole pans even. So I should be able to get this larger brush in there and get lots of paint without a problem. On my cotton rag, I have applied some alcohol marker. It's actually Mexpi. Wow, old, right? Because like I've said a million times, I'm still evacuated. I don't have access to my normal gamut of tools and art supplies, so I'm working with what I've got. It did cause a bit of a problem in my Cool Bank unbox and swatch, and I ended up using a Sakura Micron to test opacity instead, but fingers crossed it's not going to throw any real issues. If it does, I will remove this and redo it. But this is going to allow us to test the opacity with our Rosa watercolors. Now, since I figure some of you guys skip to this part, and hey, I don't blame you, not everybody wants to know every single thing about a watercolor paint, I'm gonna go ahead and give you guys my Patreon preamble, because it's only with the help and support of my amazing patrons on Patreon that I can do these kind of reviews. I don't work with any companies. I am not sponsored by anyone, and I super rarely get PR, like once in a blue moon PR, and I always disclose that to you guys. And no one pays me to review these products other than my amazing patrons. So all of the money from my Patreon goes right into this channel. It goes into buying watercolors to review. It goes into replenishing the paper that's used for these reviews. It goes into replenishing other consumables, and it goes in, well, that's about as far as it goes when I'm lucky. Ideally, it would also help fund bigger and grander ventures that I'd love to be able to record and share with you guys. So if you believe in me and you want me to keep making these kinds of reviews and tutorials, if you enjoy the work I do, please consider joining me over on Patreon at patreon.com/natosoup. So for those of you who are new here, hi, welcome. I'm Becca Hilburn. I'm a watercolor comic artist. So that means the majority of my watercolor work is for comics. And if you guys are interested in checking that out, you can check out my watercolor webcomic 7-inch Cara for freezies at 7inchcara.com. Or if you're more of a fan of the Dead Tree format, you can order Volume 1 or Volume 2, or both if you're feeling sassy, from the Natto Shop at natosoup.com/shop. As with the show notes, I'm going to pop links to all of that, as well as where you can check out more of my work, like on Instagram and on ArtStation, down in the description below. So if you like what I do, if you believe in what I'm doing and you want me to help me continue to do it, you can join me over on Patreon. I think the reviews that I do are honestly pretty important, because there's not a lot of people who make watercolor comics, and there's not very many of those people who do make watercolor comics really talk about their supplies in depth, or have the time, the ability, or the willingness to make and share tutorials the way I do. So I feel like I add a special voice to the art community with these reviews. So if you find it helpful, useful, and informative, it would really mean the world to me if you would share it with other people who might enjoy it, other people who might enjoy it as well. Well, enough preamble. Let's go ahead and just dive right into our swatching. I am not going to pre-activate these watercolors because they're already pretty sticky. That tells me that even though they're using gumarabic, it's very hydrophilic, which means it's absorbing a lot of water from the atmosphere. And this being Southeast Louisiana, we got a lot of water in the atmosphere. So I am going to turn on my dehumidifier and do this in time lapse. The colors in this set are Cadmium Yellow PY35. It's semi-opaque and has a 3-star lightfast rating. Cadmium Orange PO20 PY35, opaque with 3 stars. Carmine PR170 to a ratio of 1, transparent with 3 stars. Green PG6, transparent with 2 stars. Blue PB15, transparent with 3 stars. Yellow Ochre PY43, PY42, semi-opaque with 3 stars. English Red PR101, opaque with 3 stars. Cadmium Yellow PY35, semi-opaque with 3 stars. Cadmium Red PR108, PO20, opaque with 3 stars. Violet PV23, transparent with 2 stars. Emerald Green PG7, transparent with 3 stars. Ultramarine PB29, semi-opaque with 3 stars. Umber PBR7, semi-opaque with 3 stars. Sepia PBR7, PBK7, PR171, semi-opaque with 3 stars. Cadmium Yellow Deep PV35, PO20, opaque with 3 stars. Madder Red PR177, PR264, transparent with 3 stars. Olive Green PG17, PY1, PBK7, semi-opaque with 2 stars. Cobalt Blue PB28, semi-opaque with 3 stars. Indigo PB15 to a ratio of 1. PV19, PBK7, semi-opaque with 2 stars. Burnt Sienna PBR 101, transparent with 3 stars. And Neutral Black PBK 15 to a ratio of 1, PBK 7, PR 177, semi-transparent with 3 stars. When swatching colors, I'm testing for how easy they are to activate. I'm looking for muddiness and optical brighteners and extenders, which is why I'm showing you guys the rinse water as I, swap it out between sets of swatches. I'm looking for opacity, granulation, ability to blend and wash out, and liftability. Different brands have different properties, and Rosa Galleria has a lot of opaque and semi-opaque watercolors, so I'm expecting something similar to other European watercolors like the Lucas 1864 and Rembrandt, a fair amount of opacity compared to Japanese and US brands. These are beautiful, saturated colors that are quick to activate but do muddy the water quickly. And these are lovely paints and well worth the comparison to White Nights. I think I agree with the one review that said they might even be better. I like the color selection, how clean the colors are, the granulation. There's definitely some opacity to them, but I think you can avoid muddiness, and they're really responsive paints. I think these would be excellent paints for folks who want professional quality paints that are quite affordable, available in larger pan sizes, and are immediate to work with. These could be great for artists who work large or just impatient artists. And the color selection is so good. The neutral black, fantastic. The inclusion of a purple, wonderful. The choice of blues and greens, perfection. And I really appreciate that they don't waste space with a white that few artists are going to use when a good white wash is often cheaper and suffices. Well, all right, y'all. So far, so good. I'm really liking what I'm seeing from these Rosa Galleria watercolors. There's a little bit of granulation in there, particularly on a cotton rag paper like this one. Some colors, it would be nice to see a little more granulation, like the umber here. But I love their color selection. There's a lot of really good colors for a comic artist or an illustrator in here. And you should be able to mix any additional colors you need. I particularly like that they didn't waste our time or our money including a white either. And of course, it would be great if we had the open stock colors to expand so that you could add those colors this is just missing. Although I have to say, I'm not noticing anything like right off the bat other than like maybe a quin magenta that I'm like, oh, I would have to have that. Or honestly, much like the Roman Schmalz watercolors, some like beautiful super granulating colors. So these are still drying, so I want to do some color mixing because that's an important part of testing out, unboxing, and swatching these kind of watercolors. Of course, we're not going to know anything definitively and for certain until we do the field test, which will be in another video, and I hope you guys will check it out. So typically with my color mixing, I'm not trying to do every single color. I'm going to pick some common popular mixes that you would need to be able to do, so secondary colors, and then maybe some more unusual things like Payne's gray or mixing a purple using, blue and red, that sort of thing. So I am going to do two types of color mixing. We're going to do manual mixing where we take two colors and smash them together to get our third color, and we're going to do optical mixing where we take, well, actually I'll show you guys. So I'm going to make color grid. We're going to start by doing some stripes going vertically. You could also go horizontally. And we're going to kind of do two versions of each color. So we're going to do a cool and we're going to do a warm. Let that dry fully. And then we're going to go over it again and optically mix them. And this is a really good test to kind of tell us, how well these colors are going to layer, how well these colors are going to mix. Now, there is a nice rose madder, which would make an excellent cool red. I'm going to use the darker cool red as my cool red. And then we're going to do our warm blue. So I'm going to save a space for our cool blue. And these have already muddied the water. They really do muddy the water fast. So if you want the cleanest color mixes, I really recommend you change your wash water frequently. So I'm going to let these dry, and in the meantime I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change my water, And I'm going to go ahead and do my atomic or manual color mixes. These mix so well. You can get some really pretty mixes from these, both secondary colors and fun colors. There's a bit of granulation, so you can get some really pretty separation, and the blues, ultramarine and cobalt, and reds, carmine and madder red, make for some really pretty purples and red violets. I'm glad they also included a strong dark purple. You can't really mix that. These are a lot of fun. Alright guys, so my swatches and my mixes have had a chance to dry overnight. Now I'm going to do the second round of glazes on my optical mixing section. I'm going to do that in time lapse for you guys, and we're going to be looking for how well they kind of glaze or layer over it. We're going to be looking for some transparency, that the two colors combined and form a secondary color, and ideally we're not going to see any color reactivation or color shifting. Unfortunately for the optical mixing, despite allowing the grid to dry for a day, the colors still reactivated readily when glazed. I'm not sure if I applied the paint too thickly, kind of doubtful, but I'm willing to consider it, or if it's the paint itself, or maybe the high humidity in Louisiana right now. I'll keep an open mind during the field test, but also try to be aware that these paints might not do well with glazes or optical mixing, especially with strong concentrations. Even while these colors are still wet, you guys can see there's a lot of color movement, especially with the darker colors like our warm yellow, our warm red, our cool red, our cool blue, our warm blue, especially with the warmer red and the cooler blue. And that was after it had been allowed to dry for 24 hours. So maybe I'd applied it in too thick a concentration. I'm willing to give it some benefit of the doubt, but that is definitely an area you want to be aware of, because it does seem to kind of melt back into the paint as the water seeps in and sort of reactivates the pigment. So not what I really want to see. I hate to say it, but even dry, I want to give it the benefit of the doubt. It's been very humid here in Louisiana, and even though I'm running a dehumidifier, it's still pretty humid. So I'm going to chalk it up to maybe it just didn't dry fully despite letting it dry for about 24 hours. Give it another shot during the field test, but that part isn't really looking so great. But you know, I've had watercolors that are really great, and they just don't do super well in the optical blending test. So, you know, keep an open mind, because everything else, it's doing really pretty well. Speaking of, I do want to do another test. I want to do a wet into wet watercolor test, and then go back and do the lift tests. And we'll have tested these out, and I can have a pretty good idea of how well these would handle and what I can do with them during the field test. So with this wet into wet test, which is unusual, I don't do this too often, but after getting burnt by that Mia palette, it does seem like it might be important. The colors seem to diffuse easily and quickly into water. Straight from the pan, color control can be a bit challenging, so these are a bit sticky and they readily reactivate. They do have a tendency to kind of glob up on the paint or on the brush, especially after you've been painting for a while. So I would recommend having a secondary palette available. You can use what they've included here, or you can use your own. Generally, I like to work with a ceramic palette, but that's going to make the color control a lot easier. You guys can see how quickly the colors diffuse out onto this Blick Studio Cotton Rag watercolor paper. It reminds me a little bit of the Paul Rubens, which you guys know I really love. So if I were doing a mud test, I would do 3 layers of this, but I just kind of want to see how well the colors intersperse into water and diffuse and mix into each other without me kind of trying to force it. To be expected, these do dry a lot less saturated than they go down. The shame of watercolors in general. So while I wait for the wet into wet test to finish drying, we've got like surface dry, but it's still cool to the touch and thus not fully dry. I thought we could go ahead, save some time, and move on to the lift test and then check in with the wet and wet test afterwards. So lift test is pretty simple. Generally I use a synthetic flat. I don't happen to have one with me right now, so I'm using my silver black velvet, don't know why I had a brain fart there, my silver black velvet brush. I also have a paper towel, and all I'm really doing is checking to see how much these watercolors lift up. So I'm going to go through all 21 of them. I'm going to do that in time lapse, and then we'll actually talk a bit about them. As for lifting, these colors are pretty staining. I'm not really able to lift them all the way back up to the white of the paper. You still have a lot of color on there. This can be both good and bad. They're going to be, hopefully, despite what our glazing test showed, less prone to lifting and reactivating when you glaze on top of them, but you don't get as much neat granulation as I might hope for a set like this. So the lift test has had a chance to dry. As you guys can see, all of the colors are fairly staining, nothing scrubbed back to white, though there is some lifting. So that's generally something, you want to see variable amounts of lifting with your watercolors. You don't want them all to uniformly lift the same, because some colors are meant to be more granulating, so those would be more lifting. Some are meant to be more finely granulate or finely milled, so those would be more likely to stain. You want to see some, or at least I want to see some differences with my watercolors. And these are all kind of uniform, but that's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It's just my preference. And then my wet and wet test dried. I actually put it on top of the dehumidifier, and that actually works quite well for getting something to dry out in a very humid area in a hurry. And you guys can see when they're applied wet into wet, you can get some really nice misty diffusion, and the granulation starts to become more apparent. It kind of reminds me of the Paul Rubens tubins, where once we tried them out on the Paul Rubens watercolor paper, you could really appreciate how they granulate and how they layer and how they blend with one another. I just kind of wanted to see, after getting burned by the Mia watercolors, I wanted to see if these could handle wet into wet, and it seems like they do. They diffuse really nicely, and you can get some really nice misty effects. So these watercolors, the Rosa Galleria watercolors, are sometimes compared to White Night watercolors. White Night is made in Russia, Rosa are Ukrainian watercolors, but I think there's more comparisons that can be made than just that. Now, I haven't used my White Night watercolors in a while. They were okay, but I didn't fall in love with them. It's not a palette I look for time and time again, like with my Da Vinci or my Aquarius or my Core watercolors. So I do think I like these better than the White Nights. I mean, I really feel like you get more bang for your buck, to be really honest. You get 21 colors for about the same price that the White Nights 12 cost. And I used to use Yarka watercolors quite frequently, and I still like the mid-range Yarkas where you get more colors. I just think the White Nights are honestly a little overhyped for what they are and what they cost. That doesn't make them not good, but I wouldn't necessarily compare the Rosa Galleria watercolors directly with the White Nights. So what I think is a more apt comparison, in my opinion, would be the Roman Schmalz Aquarius watercolors. So if you look at them, they honestly look pretty similar. It's a similar price point. Roman Schmalz watercolors are really quite affordable. They look like they've been hand-filled. I think the same could be said for the Rosa watercolors. These are very quick to activate. They're just fun paints. Even though I haven't yet done the field test for these, I've actually used several colors from this palette frequently. So that's definitely a good sign, and I think there's going to be good things to come with the field test, but I can give you guys a more apt comparison of these two palettes after I've completed the field test for both, and I probably will do so once I finish the Rosa Galleria field test. So these are both, I think they're both Ukrainian watercolors, or maybe the Roman Schmalz is Polish. I don't actually have internet access right now, so gosh, it makes doing my research so much harder. I actually have to travel to get a little bit of internet. But I think these are both good watercolors. I found that the Roman Schmalz tended to layer a little bit better, glaze a little bit better. They weren't as prone to lifting up And the granulation, particularly with some of the super granulating colors, is more pronounced, which is something that I like. This swatch here, it's just a color map. It really doesn't do these watercolors the justice they deserve. I really like these, and if you're on the market for good watercolors, these aren't a bad option. You can get them from Jackson's Art Supply, and I would recommend starting with the 5-color test set. I'm actually pointing to 6, but it's like this one, this one, this one, and this one. Oh, and the that one, Aquarius green. So, I mean, I'm already selling you guys on the Aquarius ones. I don't have any kind of partnership with Roman Schmalz. I don't have any kind of partnership with Rosa Galleria. I don't have any kind of affiliate link with Jackson's Art. I do have an Amazon affiliate code though, so if you use the link that I share in the description, I do actually see a little bit of money for that. But that comes at no extra cost to you guys, and I really appreciate it when you guys use my affiliate links. So I think the most direct comparison is with these Roman Schmalz watercolors, but another, I think, very apt comparison is with the US-made Da Vinci watercolors. So these are also hand poured. In fact, I refilled some of my favorite colors just from tubes of Da Vinci watercolors. They're quick to activate. Honestly, I think these are a joy to paint with. This is a palette you guys see me use time and time again. So it's one that I've fallen in love with, and it really stands the test of time. So these are definitely more expensive, but they last a really long time, and you can refill this particular palette from tubes. This is their mixing palette. Generally, in the US at least, Da Vinci watercolors seem to be primarily sold in tubes. This is one of their half pan sets. They don't have too many of those. And this was purchased from Jerry's Artorama. Now, it's a lot more expensive. For these 12 colors, it's a lot more expensive than the Rosa Galleria. So if you're on a budget and you're looking for good watercolors that I think you're going to enjoy using, that deliver a lot of color, and you don't necessarily want to mix a lot of your colors, I think the Rosa Galleria set might be more what you're looking for. But I have had more experience with the Da Vinci palette. It's one I grab all the time. And I mean, I'm not super hot on their inclusion of white, but in general, I really like the color selection. I find it really easy to use, and it's a palette that I really like. Plus, the included palette is just beautiful. Now, I am a sucker for, you know, custom palettes. Even if all you do is screen your name on it, I still really like that. So I would say not having the White Nights with me right now. And I mean, my White Nights, I got the 12 color set. I just was kind of underwhelmed, especially because they'd gotten so hyped up, and because I've used Yarka watercolors, which are made by the same company. They just did a little bit of rebranding. I'd used those for years and I liked them, and I didn't think that the White Nights was significantly better for the kind of art that I make than the Yarka set. So I could just also be biased by my familiarity. In fact, I actually have a video where I compare the children's grade Yarka against the Yarka, like the big set, against the White Nights. And I'll try to remember to link that for you guys because, you know, I want you guys to have as much information as possible. But the Rosa Galleria set is honestly priced around the same price point as a student grade set. And it's in you get a lot more paint. These are whole pans instead of half pans. And instead of extruded little chiclets, these are poured paints. And they don't seem to be full of extenders or brighteners. My only complaint, and it could 110% be just super humid Louisiana weather. It didn't get a chance to really dry out. These watercolors are still kind of tacky. I think they're a little bit hydrophilic. I think they've absorbed some of the atmospheric water, and that could be throwing off. They might be acting soupy. And that's not really the best time to judge a watercolor. So I'm kind of withholding my judgment about this until I've done the field test. But my only complaint about these really is the color movement, even though it had been allowed to dry. The fact that they reactivated makes glazing a lot harder, but you know, it could have been environmental error in this instance. So I'm going to kind of withhold my judgment from that. Let's talk about the pros and cons of the Rosa Galleria watercolors. And we're going to start with our pros. They're very affordable, especially for professional quality paints. You get a full pan, so you get a lot of paint for your money. There's a great color selection. 21 colors and no white in sight feels so right. and they mix beautifully and cleanly, except for those optical mixes, which we'll revisit that another time. So what about the cons? Well, with paints this great, you just want to be able to order more open stock and fill up this palette, and that doesn't seem to be an option if you live in the US. Although y'all should let me know in the comments with links if I'm wrong, because I would definitely like to score more of these and try to find some really granulating ones at that. They do muddy the water quickly, so you're going to want to frequently change your water out for best representation of these paints. And these may not do well with multi-layer illustrations or paintings that require glazes and multiple layers. What's my verdict on the Rosa Gallery or Rosa Galleria watercolors? You know, I often say to skip student grade and go with a good, inexpensive professional grade watercolor, and how I've reviewed quite a number of cheaper professional grade paints that are really quite excellent. This is going to go onto that list for sure. There's definitely some issues. We can't just order refills or refill it from the tube. You can't necessarily get open stock colors of this right now. I don't know if they're just out of stock on Amazon or what, but it would be great if more American retailers gave this brand a look. And on that note, I do hope that as Rosa becomes more popular, it's going to be more commonly available in the US without a huge hike in the pricing, because frankly, professional grade watercolors in the US, whether we're talking White Knights or Holbein or, PwC is still pretty cheap here in Louisiana, or Winsor & Newton, professional grade paints here in the US come at a hefty price tag. Even compared to, okay, for example, like when I was buying watercolors in Japan, Winsor & Newton is like half the price there. Kusakabe is super cheap over there. You can get it at like a department store for like $3 a tube. Holbein is super cheap over there. When you live in the US, you see a significant price in art supplies, maybe because art supplies and art aren't really considered a common hobby anymore. So maybe there isn't the market to justify those lower prices, or maybe because they know we're willing to pay more for nicer stuff. But it does kind of bother me because I want art and good art supplies to be accessible to more people, which is one of the reasons I do reviews like this one here. So I would love to see these sold in stores, commonly available in the US. It would give me a chance to explore this a lot more. But I am concerned that, as with most art supplies in the US, once they become available, they're going to get a lot more expensive. You can, however, get several of the different Rosa Gallery sets, the different size sets, over on Amazon for a really fair price. So I'll be sure to put links as well as my show notes down in the description below. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for the unbox and swatch review of the Rosa Gallery watercolors. If you're interested in a definitive opinion, then I highly recommend you click that subscribe button if you're not yet subscribed, as well as the bell notification so that YouTube supposedly lets you know when the video is live, because I do have a field test coming up where I really put these through its paces, creating a watercolor illustration using my art style. So if you have a cartoony art style or a comic art style, or if you're interested in anime and manga style art, that's definitely a video, that's definitely a review you're going to want to catch. Now, I can't tell you guys how long it's going to take me to get to that because I am doing a student grade watercolor showdown, and I want to do the unboxing swatches before I get to the field test. So it may take me a while to get to the field test for this. If you want to see it sooner, if you want to see it before anyone else gets to see it, you can support my work and help fund future reviews and tutorials by joining me over on Patreon at patreon.com. Speaking of my amazing art nerds over on Patreon, get a shout out in the end credits. So stay tuned to see who is helping me create watercolor reviews and tutorials and on occasion, comic art and tutorials. I want to thank my patrons so much for their support. I couldn't continue to do it without you guys, and the funds you guys send me on Patreon, your subscriptions, help me purchase watercolors like this one here, as well as consumables like watercolor paper, which, as you guys saw, I go through at least 2 every review. So thank you guys so much. So what did you guys think of the Rosa Galleria watercolors? Are you excited for the field test? Are these just probably not for you? Or are you already well aware of them and didn't need me to point them out? They were pretty new to me. I hadn't heard of them until Amazon finally decided to recommend them to me as I was prepping for my student grade watercolor showdown. These professional grade paints are priced at a student grade price tag. So if you haven't bought your own set yet and you're interested, you might want to go ahead and get it now before the price goes up, kind of like with the White Knight watercolors. There's a lot to like about these watercolors, but I am a little bit concerned about their ability or inability to do optical mix and glazes. So that's definitely something we're gonna have to experiment with and try to push during the field test. I hope you guys found this review to be helpful, useful, and informative. If you enjoyed it, do me a huge favor and leave me a big old thumbs up. That's such a great encouragement for me, especially because I've been working on a lot of these reviews in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida. So if my studio looks different, it's not because we finished moving in, it's because I'm reviewing while evacuated, which is maybe not always the best idea, but it's entertaining and it keeps me busy. So hey, we'll go with it. I want to thank my amazing patrons on Patreon once more. You guys will see their names here in just a second. Reviews like this one would absolutely not be possible without their support. So if you guys enjoy these kinds of reviews and tutorials, it would really mean a lot to me if you can afford to do so, if you would join me over on Patreon. I hope you guys are looking forward to the next watercolor review in my student grade showdown. I've been allowing people to vote on what I'm going to focus on next over on Twitter and in the comments tag. So this showdown might be finished by the time this runs, but I don't think it will because I've got a bunch. I've got buku watercolors to review queue for UQ. So I hope you guys will stay tuned. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Hopefully this review helps you guys make art a habit, and I hope you guys stay safe and healthy wherever you are. Bye guys!